Alan, what prompted this audit, should we say?
It's quite simple, Mark. This has risen to the top of the political agenda, certainly in Western Europe. We see Angela Merkel rarely gives a speech these days without mentioning China. Emmanuel Macron has also got China very much in focus. He was in China in January and he gave a remarkable press conference at the end of his visit, notably, where he was calling for a common European strategy towards China because it just doesn't exist so far. So we decided to look at what the extent of China's involvement in Europe actually is.
And Alan, what was the most striking thing that you uncovered?
It's not so much the overall volume, although that is very large. It's far higher than over the past decade for Chinese investment in the US, for example. It's more the spread of investments that you've got high-tech companies in Western Europe, robot makers. You've got car makers, of course, but also in Eastern Europe and in the south of Europe, you're seeing China coming in and taking control of key infrastructure, such as ports, airports, railroads, and bridges. So there's a huge spread, and that raises all sorts of, it raises a dilemma for governments. Obviously, investment is welcome, but at the same time, there are concerns if China or indeed any other country takes control of this key infrastructure or strategic industries.
Alan,
so it's a dilemma for European governments.
It's a dangerous game for China too, is it not? I mean, China needs to be invested all over the place. It needs allies. It needs, strategic hubs that it can, look to in case of trouble. And yet there's no guarantee that it would find a friend in any of these countries that it's investing in if it needed them.
That's true, Vonnie, but at the same time, what we're seeing is that this is a pattern of Chinese investment right across the world. And we've seen recently some US government blocks on would-be Chinese investments. This is also the case in Australia and in Japan. And so we're seeing Europe is potentially one of the last truly open markets for China. So there's all sorts of expectations that we'll see growing investment in Europe, which of course is no bad thing per se, but there are these concerns about the nature of some of these investments.
Put some figures on it, Alan, for our viewers. How much has China invested in Europe and where primarily?
The total that we came up with, I should say that I'm focusing more on the political aspect. It was my colleague Andre Tartar that crunched all this Bloomberg data for weeks and came up with a number of more than $300 billion which had been invested by China across about 30 countries over the past decade. The majority is where you might imagine in Germany and in the UK and in France. But as I said, there are also extremely interesting investments made in South and Eastern Europe, also even up as far as the Baltic Sea, where it's mostly infrastructure that China is picking up as part of its massive Belt and Road programme.
I would
so
argue
it's a huge spread of investments.